Good morning in this part of the world and good afternoon out there. Well, my name is Claudia Isabel Medina Lopez. I'm a Peruvian feminist researcher, and I'm going to present, my dissertation that I developed for my second master's degree is State of Impunity, Peruvian State Social Representation of Feminicide. First, I want to share with you what I'm going to talk about. First, I want to highlight why in this dissertation I use feminicide instead of femicide, that is the common way to name these kind of crimes. I'm going to talk a little bit about Peruvian gender violence context, and then I'm going to present my research questions, my theoretical and methodological framework, and then the cases I analyze and the main finding around this analysis. Well, first, what is feminicide? Well, feminicide is a concept that was developed taking into its basis the theoretical formulation of femicide. No, but it's a Latin American interpretation and reconceptualization. Why I say this? Because in Latin America, feminicide is not just an equivalent voice of homicide, but for women. Feminicide highlights the gender component that is around the murder of a woman due to gender reasons, and take into consideration the continuum of women's human rights violation around their lives. For example, it also includes physical, psychological violence, economical violence, institutional violence as well. So it's like the end of a very long chain of human rights violations and violence manifestations based on gender. Feminicide in Latin America has a component that is like representative, that it's impunity. And when we talk about impunity, it's not only because these cases, yes, they deserve some kind of punishment, but it's very rare. It's scared the cases that are addressed as a gender-based violence and a systematic crime. No, feminicide in the Latin American elaboration is a crime against humanity, and it's a state crime. Not only a state crime because the state perpetrated, but also because the state in our nations does not take the proper actions to prevent it and then to punish it. Well, in Latin America, there's a huge theoretical development around this topic. There are some authors that talk about feminicide as a state crime, as a sexual systemic femicide. They also address this crime as a social control strategy as well. There are some feminist authors that talk about femigenocide, and other ones that believe that this is a necropolitic system, and it goes on. No, there's a huge production in this field, but I want to share with you today this concept of Bejarano that highlights especially what are the main characteristics of a feminicide in Latin America. It's a public and as well as a private. It can occur in a public as well as in a private sphere. It also involves the state or individual perpetrators, and this is like a key issue because the state could be guilty directly or indirectly, as I said before. Individual perpetrator could be as well state agents or private ones. It also includes systematic, generalized, and day-to-day interpersonal violence. And above all, is systemic violence rooted in social, political, economic, and cultural inequalities. It also understands the intersection of gender dynamics with the justice and cruelty of racism and economic system in local and global context. No, it's a very strong formulation. It's not only powerful when it goes and when we took this definition and we convert it in a law, but it also recognized a lot of issues that the feminist movement in Latin America has been raised for a lot of time, especially due to the crimes in Ciudad Juárez in Mexico and cases in El Salvador and Guatemala that are especially cruel. Then in Peru, why in Peru? What happened around feminicide in Peru? Well, in Peru, gender-based violence is generalized. Almost 55% of women between 15 and 45 years old have suffered gender violence in their life, and this was committed by their partner or former partner. In Peru, violence has a very strong link with relationships. In 2021, there were 104. Well, I'm sorry, my English is not that well. That it well, we have a huge amount of cases, 140,000. Oh my God, no. Well, we have that quantity of cases that were registered about gender-based violence against girls and women in the women emergency centers. No, there are institutions specialized in gender-based violence that register these kind of cases. No, 85.8% of all of them were against women and girls. And just in 2022, we have this number that, and the projection says that we are going to have more cases than in the 21. In 2022 as well, we have 5,904 missing women. This is a phenomenon that is concerning authorities and as well as civil organizations, because this kind of manifestation of violence appears especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it targets especially girls, adolescents, not more than adult women, no? And of course, around feminicide, from 2009 to 2021, we have 1,629 feminicides and 2,728 feminicide attempts registered just by the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations. So with this context in mind, and knowing before that that the first law of feminicide in Peru was enacted in 2011, and then we have a reformulation in 2013. So we have like some years working on this through the justice system. I want to answer this kind of questions in this research. How are social representations about feminicide construct through state actors? How are gender expectations made visible through these representations? And do state actors address this crime from a gender perspective? Why I'm formulated these questions? Because, and it's something I should put in the context, of course, we have a justice system, we have a formal law, but authorities like the Ombudsman Office detect that feminicide were not addressed properly. The arguments around them does not highlight the gender component of the crime. That was the reason why we have this law, and because we want to punish any kind of gender-based violence. However, court decisions, judges and prosecutor discourses were full of gender stereotypes, gender mandates, gender expectations that have a strong weight in the final decision. So I I want to see if this was real, analyzing 5 trial records. I'm going to talk about this here. The theoretical approach, as I said before, took the feminicide theory, of course, developed here in Latin America, that says that every feminicide, no matter if it's a feminist, it happened in a family or in a close relationship, any feminicide is invested in personality. No, despite that relationship victim and perpetrator can have. It also has an antagonic, a generic antagonism that emanates from the patriarchal and hierarchical power structure. It's not a crime that happened because I have a disagreement or I have problems in my relationship. This is a crime that happened due to a patriarchal structure, due to gender mandates, and due to organization of our social life around gender and gender norms. It also took that the colonial feminism theory, especially Latin American one, that privileged the experience of violence of local women and their context. Well, in the dissertation, I talk about literal patriarchy in colonial context that formulates Segato and says that indeed, in our countries, law and the state does not take into account as an important issue to attend all women or others demands. No, they are not part of the main issues that the state should attend and take into consideration. That you can see it not in budget, in policies, and at the end, in the way these policies address these issues. In methodology, I use the critical discourse analysis to analyze these trial records, because through the critical discourse analysis, I can see how power structures are perpetrated through the voice of the state. These tools, like trial records, are so strongly symbolically talking, and also because they make decisions about what are the goods that we want to protect as a state. So when you have decisions that justified a penalty or that justified a sentence through gender mandate, is the state talking to not only to the perpetrator, because this finally is public, but to the society, saying that these kind of stereotypes, this kind of expectations around gender are legal, these kind of expectations are taken into account for the state. So that's why it's very powerful to analyze trial records, because you can find here all the arguments the prosecutor and judge develop during the analysis of the case. And as well, you can access to a perpetrator voice and to the witnesses, or when the victim survives and is a feminicide attempt, you can access also to her testimony, or even to families or relatives from the victims that can say something around the crime. No, so you have a lot of details to analyze. I will love to go in deep to this analysis in a further research. For this one, I just concentrate my efforts into judges and prosecutors, but I would love to do it also with victims, witnesses, and all the formulation around these crimes. Well, I want to share with you the characteristic of the 5 cases I studied. Why 5? Because, well, it was a very short research, and I also well, these kind of documents are very long. Each one has more than 600 pages. So I focus my efforts on 5 to analyze it deeply. Well, as you can see, there is not a huge difference in age between the victim and the perpetrator. There are from different parts of Peru, not only Lima, that is the capital, but also Tacna, that is in the limits with Chile, also Junín, that is in the central Andes, also in Loreto, that is in the Amazonia, and Piura, that is the north coast part of Peru. As you can see as well, we can see that there is a pattern here that we have. Almost all the perpetrators are former partners. They does not have a current relationship with the victim, but they break up, and the feminicide occur after the breakup of a violent relationship. Then how the crimes were labeled by the state. No, in the first part in Lima, we have the aggravated feminicide due to great cruelty, and then we have in Tacna a simple feminicide, but it does not take into consideration the cruelty that involved the crime. We are going to talk about that later. In Junín, we have an aggravated crime, but not due to cruelty, that also have this characteristic, but just because the victim was under 18 years old. She was an adolescent. And then in Loreto, we have an aggravated attempt on feminicide that was premeditated and great cruelty. And in Loreto, we have the voice of the victim. And well, the decision is terrible. Now, in Piura, we have an aggravated feminicide as well because of great cruelty and because it was premeditated. Well, the decisions you can see here, I convert the civil reparation in US dollars to have in mind and to have a common, currency to know a little bit how much it represents, because they are in soles, that is the Peruvian coin. So we have that the first one in Lima was found guilty with 20 years in prison and a civil reparation of $5,000 USD. In Tacna, because it was simple, not to great cruelty, we just have 12 years in prison, but a bigger civil reparation. Now, in this part, you can see that we don't have like a common understanding between Lima and Tacna, because the first one has well, here in Spanish we call it agravantes, no? But it's not a simple crime. It took into consideration another legal aspects that makes it like worse. But we have a bigger civil reparation in the simple one. No, we also have in Junín 12 years all in prison, despite the aggravated component of the crime, and a civil reparation that is considerable under that was considered in Tacna, that was a simple one. And in Loreto, that is I think the worst case I have to analyze, we have this feminicide attempt where the perpetrator was absolved, despite the victim testimony and despite the witnesses and despite, well, all the proofs that were around this case. And we have just a civil reparation of $500. In Piura is the, I believe is the case that have more proper addressment of the case. We have 20 years in prison and civil reparation of a bigger civil reparation. No, so let's go to main findings with these considerations in mind. Right? Okay, as I said before, two laws were used in this when the Peruvian state addressed these cases. The first one, that is in 2011, that have a different approach from the one in 2013. In 2011, the law focused only the identification of a feminicide in the relationship the victim has with the perpetrator. Yes, and in 2013, the conceptualization of feminicide as a crime is more complex. It's not only because of the relationship they have, but it is based especially in that discrimination against women, regardless, and it's explicit, it's very explicit in this part, regardless the existence or not existence of the marital relationship or cohabitation between the victim and perpetrator. So it doesn't matter if I had a relationship. It's not only focused in what we call intimate feminicide, that is the one that occurs in the context of our relationship. It could be any murder of a woman due to gender reason that is based on the structural discrimination against women. But one of my main findings is that in the 5 cases I analyzed, despite most of them use the 2013 law, the feminicide was defined by the relationship of the victim. So this, through the theoretical framework that I use, could be an indistinction strategy. Why we say that? Because we are highlighting just one component of feminicide, but not the main one. We are not highlighting this structural context of discrimination against women. We are just, we are putting into the private sphere these structural and systemic crimes, because we are just focused on the relationship of two individual, two subjects. And we are not addressing this as a systemic crime. And I have 2 examples here that were processed by the second law. In Peru, for example, the judge to accept the complaint, the case, to accept it, he asked if the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator have been proven. And because it's proof, yes, I can use the feminicide law, despite he was using the 2013 one. And in Tacna, that took as well that second law, the prosecutor argued that it was a feminicide. The prosecutor, the part that should defend the victim and should state the character of this kind of crime, that if this was a feminicide because the victim and the author were ex-partner or former partners. So we can see here that we are not addressing a gender-based crime as we should. We are addressing just the matter of your current or former partner. And it also is applied just when we are talking about women. So we are not addressing feminicide as a gender-based crime. Another important finding was that previous episodes of violence were not considered in the analysis of the cases. In Junín, for example, the case of this adolescent that was murdered by her former partner, the judge, even the prosecutor, does not take into consideration 3 testimonies that confirm threats and a complaint of kidnapping against the author that happened before the crime itself. Indeed, in this case, the girl was stalked and was, received a lot of violence from this author since she was 15 years old. So there were a bunch of violence episodes that were not considered. And in this part that I took a quote, the prosecutor argued that although semen was found inside the victim's body when she was found dead in a public space, it was impossible to prove that the victim could have had sexual relationship with the perpetrator before the crime. Yes, because they are not taking into consideration all the complaints and the testimonies that says that she has no longer a relationship with him. She was afraid of him, and and she received threats. No. Then the 5 sentences. And this is something that why I put, this is because I put this last column to the decisions. The 5 sentences were below the legally established minimum years that they should have due to the characteristic of the crime. Although I'm not a lawyer, I'm a sociologist, the arguments that prosecutor and judges use to justify their decisions, I'm going to develop later, are full of victim blaming discourses and gender expectations or gender mandates around the victim. So during the whole trial record, it seems that the victim was in judgment and not the perpetrator, because all the arguments are focused in the moral of the victim, in her behavior, and the perpetrator testimonies took as a fact and not as a discourse. And this is very important to highlight. Feminicide is surrendered by impunity. We read in the state discourses that there is a legitimization of impunity and that relationship based on power, because of what I'm going to show here. I have some examples. Here it is. We found victim blaming and privatization of feminicide discourses. I said it before, feminicide is just a crime that happened between 2 individuals that have a terrible relationship and is not conceived as a systemic crime based on gender relationships. The motivation of the crime is always framed in the legal infidelity of the victim. No, that's why I'm saying that it seems that the victim was in judgment and not the perpetrator. A huge part of the arguments were based in if the victim was cheating the perpetrator or not. And it also appeared this other discourse that the suffering of the perpetrator due to the breakup of the relationship, the pain of the missing love that can justify the way he acts. And this is a very powerful as well gender discourse we find in these trial records. In Lima, for example, that was a feminicide with great cruelty and premeditation. Well, the perpetrator accepted the charges against him, arguing that he has a conflicting relationship with the victim from whom he separated because she had been unfaithful to him. And he also can present 3 witnesses that can say that she was cheating on him. So, and this testimony was taken into consideration by the attorney and by the judge. So we are not judging if the victim was unfaithful or not. We are judging why he killed her former partner. So here we have a conceptualization on what relationships demands, even when you are a former partner, what are the expectations that are put on the victim that should not have a new relationship. She has to respect her former a partner, and this is shared by the state as well, because we are going to see how they took into consideration these kind of arguments to justify their decision. For example, this is the second one. In the same case, this was the argument of the perpetrator. We can see that the judge take it. It's necessary to evaluate the motive for the crime, constituted by the fact that the victim would have been unfaithful, facts that influence and motivate the accused to murder her. This is just a part of the justification of the time the judge give the perpetrator in prison and the civil reparation. So yes, you can be judged for being unfaithful, and that can justify your murder. Another my findings, and this is of course my analysis, is not a fact, it's an interpretation. Perpetrators and state representatives seems to speak the same language, seems to share the same symbols, seems to share the same gender mandates and the gender expectations. No, victim blaming discourses victim blaming discourses make the crimes legitimized by the state. The state is saying, yes, you were killed because you were not a proper woman. And because of this, you are not an innocent victim. And this is the argument inside these kind of decisions that are justified by these gender discourses. The language of feminicide is understandable and generates empathy between prosecutor, judges, and perpetrators, and they are not, well, especially in Piura, I believe, it doesn't matter if the judges in these cases were women. So, with this in mind, we can say that the symbolic effectiveness of the feminicide law, that it was a huge achievement by the feminist movement here in Peru, indeed has not the effect that we want to have, no? Of course, it formally recognized the feminicide as a crime, and it should protect any woman from a gender-based violence act. Is the law and the application of the law is not targeting this manifestation of violence due to the proper argument and due to the proper contextualization of the crime. They are just punishing a specific relationship between a man and a woman, and they are not punishing gender-based violence. They are reproducing gender stereotypes, they are reproducing gender mandates and gender expectations. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to close this. Okay. I know.